In the long, quiet hallways of the elite Eldridge Academy, a sinister moment was unfolding. Isabella felt a sharp sting across her cheek as the school's star athlete, Lucas, shoved her back against the cold, unforgiving marble floors. Blood trickled from her nose, and her heart raced, echoing with the laughter of Lucas and his friends. The hall was nearly empty, save for a few scattered students, none of whom dared intervene. At that instant, Isabella knew she had crossed an invisible line. There would be no turning back. What was about to happen would change the prestigious Eldridge Academy forever. Lucas, arrogant and untouchable, never thought about the consequences of his actions. He was the son of the school superintendent, a golden child, untarnished by the rules that bound everyone else. His friends Miles, the mayor's son, and Jake, whose father owned the city's biggest real estate empire, laughed at her pain as they always did. Together, they were known as the Untouchables, the elite clique that ruled the school. "I told you, stay in your lane, scholarship girl," Lucas sneered, his eyes cold as ice. "Next time, don't make me ask twice." Isabella wiped the blood from her face with the sleeve of her blazer, her gaze unwavering. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about the broken system that had kept her and others like her in their place. But this time, it was different. Her father was coming. Her father, General James Reynolds, was no ordinary man. A former military strategist known for executing covert operations across 5 continents. His very name struck fear into the hearts of foreign generals. He was a legend, a tactician who had never lost a battle. And now his daughter was calling him for help. "I'll let my father know about this," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible as she spoke through clenched teeth. Lucas's laughter echoed down the empty hallway. "Your father? What will he do?" "Call the principal. My dad plays golf with him every Sunday. Your word against ours, and no one will believe you." What Lucas didn't know was that Isabella's father had vowed never to take a life again, but his strategic mind was still as sharp as ever. James Reynolds was about to awaken a predator that had been dormant for far too long. The battle was just beginning. The day after the brutal encounter, Isabella walked through the familiar gates of Eldridge Academy, her face still bearing the marks of the previous day's violence. The bruise under her right eye had darkened to a deep purple, and her nose was still swollen. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, but there was something different in the air, an undercurrent of tension, as though the entire school was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As she entered the building, she noticed Mrs. Palmer, the secretary, glancing at her with concern. Their eyes met for just a moment, but the brief exchange spoke volumes. The school was a web of whispers, and Mrs. Palmer was yet another silent witness to the injustice that ran rampant in these hallowed halls. Isabella made her way to her locker, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. She had promised her father she wouldn't use the emergency line unless it was absolutely necessary. But with every day that passed, the torment grew worse. Cruel comments, racial slurs, deliberate sabotage of her belongings. Yesterday had been the breaking point, when the violence escalated from words to fists. She couldn't keep letting it slide. With a trembling hand, she reached for her phone, hesitating for a moment. Her father had made it clear that this was a line reserved only for life and death situations, for moments when she had no other options left. But now she felt she had no choice. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she typed a short message. The words simple yet charged with urgency. "I need you, Dad." Code red. Her father's response came in less than a minute. "I'll be there in 48 hours. Do nothing. Document everything. Trust me." Isabella took a deep breath, relief flooding her as she read the message. She had never doubted her father's resolve. General James Reynolds wasn't just any father. He was a man of action, a strategist who could bring empires to their knees, and he was coming for them. Back home, in the modest apartment she shared with her mother, Isabella sat silently at the kitchen table. Carolyn, her mother, had seen the change in her daughter's demeanor, but she had no idea the extent of the abuse Isabella had endured. As Caroline gently examined her daughter's swollen face, she could only shake her head in disbelief. "What happened, sweetheart?" Caroline asked, her voice filled with concern as she carefully touched Isabella's bruised cheek. Isabella didn't want to worry her mother further. She had seen enough pain in her mother's eyes, the stress of working long hours as a nurse at the local hospital. But she knew she had no choice but to tell her the truth. "It was Lucas Beatley," she whispered. "He wanted me to do his homework, and when I refused, he punched me." Her voice cracked. Caroline's face drained of color as she processed the words. She knew Lucas's father, Superintendent Gregory Beatley, was deeply entrenched in the school's administration. Any action against Lucas could lead to dire consequences for her own career. Isabella took a deep breath. "I called Dad. I used the emergency number." Her voice faltered as she spoke, and the weight of her decision hit her all at once. Caroline stood in silence for a moment, her expression torn between concern and pride. She knew her ex-husband well. When James Reynolds was involved, nothing would be left to chance. But this wasn't just about Isabella anymore. This was about a broken system that had allowed this to happen in the first place. "You know what he's capable of, right?" Caroline asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I know," Isabella replied, her eyes darkening with resolve. "But I can't let them keep doing this. Not anymore." As the hours ticked by, Isabella sat in her room, the phone now cradled in her hand. She could barely concentrate on her homework, the words on the page blurring before her eyes. Her mind kept drifting back to her father's message: do nothing. Document everything. But how much longer could she endure? It had been a year since she first walked through the gates of Eldridge Academy, a scholarship student from a modest background, a world apart from the privileged students who filled the halls. They'd never let her forget it. At first, it was just whispers, the occasional snicker as she passed. But over time, it grew worse. The subtle racism, the exclusion, and now the physical violence. She glanced at the photos she had taken over the past few months, each one a record of the insults, the threats, the little incidents that piled up. She'd caught them on camera, Lucas, Miles, and Jake, taunting other students, cheating on exams, even throwing a racial slur at an Asian student during lunch. It was all there, proof of their arrogance, their disregard for the rules. She knew it was only a matter of time before they would go too far. Meanwhile, far from Eldridge, her father was already working. General James Reynolds didn't need to be told what to do. He was a man of action, a tactician whose mind operated like a chessboard. When he got the message from Isabella, he immediately set his plan into motion. He had already pulled strings from behind the scenes, contacting his most trusted allies. It was time for a quiet, calculated strike. The kind of strike that would dismantle the system and expose the truth, all without ever raising a hand. At Fort Chandler, in a secure military base hundreds of miles away, General Reynolds gathered his most trusted operatives. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the men and women who had fought alongside him in covert missions around the globe. They knew how to execute operations in the shadows, leaving no trace behind. They would make sure that the truth came to light, no matter the cost. "Listen up," General Reynolds began, his voice cold and firm. "This isn't an official operation, but it's personal. We're not going to use our military resources. This is about strategy. We're going to expose a system that's been allowing corruption and bullying to thrive, and we're going to do it in a way that makes sure everyone involved pays." He paused, looking at each of them. "Our mission isn't about violence. It's about using the weaknesses of the enemy to bring them down. This will be surgical, precise. We will make sure that the truth gets out. And when it does, Eldridge Academy will never be the same." One of his team members, Major Alice, raised her hand. "General, are you sure about using your contacts in this?" "This isn't an official mission." General Reynolds met her gaze. "When it comes to my daughter, there's no line I won't cross." Back in the academy, Isabella had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. She only knew that her father was coming, and with him, the storm. As the days passed, things began to escalate. The bullying became bolder, more open. Lucas and his friends seemed to believe that they were untouchable, invincible. They had no idea what was coming for them. But Isabella wasn't alone anymore. Nicole, a new girl in school who had taken an interest in Isabella's situation, quietly joined her cause. Nicole's father was a renowned investigative journalist, and she had grown up learning how to spot injustice from a mile away. She had seen what Lucas and his friends had done to Isabella and decided it was time to take a stand. "I don't care about reputation," Nicole said one day at lunch, sitting across from Isabella. "My dad taught me that silence in the face of injustice is just as bad as perpetuating it. We'll get them back, but we need to be smart." Isabella nodded, a small flicker of hope igniting inside her. Just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. As the tension in the school continued to build, Isabella couldn't help but notice the subtle shift. She walked through the halls, her posture now straighter, her head held higher. Gone were the days of walking with her head down, avoiding eye contact with the bullies who lurked in every corner. Something had changed inside her, something she hadn't expected. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been silenced by the system. Nicole's quiet support had become a lifeline. Nicole wasn't afraid to call out the injustices she saw, and together they started documenting every instance of bullying and corruption. They filmed Lucas and his friends cheating during exams, intimidating other students, and spreading hate. The footage wasn't just evidence of their actions, it was a declaration. They were done being invisible, they were done being victims. But the real battle was still ahead. Isabella knew her father was coming, but she had no idea how far his reach went. General Reynolds didn't just play the game, he redefined it. He was the master of strategy, and in his hands, the system that had allowed the bullies at Eldridge to thrive would crumble. Meanwhile, at Eldridge's administration building, the school's hierarchy was beginning to feel the pressure. Director Regina Harper, who had long turned a blind eye to the misdeeds of the elite students, was now facing an unknown threat. She had received an anonymous dossier detailing the school's history of negligence and discrimination, but she had no idea where it had come from. "Have you heard anything about this?" Regina asked her staff, her voice tense. "Nothing official," replied one of the senior teachers. "But I have heard rumors that the Beatleys have been looking into some kind of investigation. We need to be careful." Regina adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowed. She had spent years protecting the interests of the wealthy families whose donations kept the school running. The idea that someone was actively threatening her carefully constructed world was unsettling. She needed answers, and fast. In the weeks that followed, small changes began to occur. Cameras appeared in areas that had previously been neglected. A new surveillance system was quietly installed overnight, and the administration began to scrutinize everything, from attendance records to disciplinary actions. It was clear that someone was watching, but no one knew who it was or why. In the midst of this, Isabella received a strange package at school. It was an unmarked envelope delivered to the school secretary with a note, "For Isabella Parker." When she opened it, inside was a brand new smartphone, sleek and sophisticated, unlike anything she had ever owned. Confused, she powered it on and found a single message waiting for her. It was from her father. "Prepare yourself, it's time." The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Isabella had no idea what her father had planned, but she trusted him. She knew he would do whatever it took to make things right. She just had to hold on a little longer. That night, Isabella's phone buzzed with a video call. Her father's stern, yet calm face appeared on the screen. "I'm on my way," General Reynolds said, his voice low and controlled. "But before I arrive, you need to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice." Isabella listened closely, her heart pounding in her chest. "I've already set things in motion," he continued. "The system at Eldridge is broken, and it needs to be exposed. You've done well documenting everything. Now it's time to shine a light on the darkness." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief and fear. She had never felt this level of certainty before. Her father was coming, and when he did, everything was going to change. The following morning, a palpable shift took place at Eldridge Academy. It was subtle at first, but it didn't take long for the students to sense that something was different. The usual chatter in the halls had been replaced with nervous glances and hushed conversations. Even the air felt heavy, as if the entire school was bracing itself for what was about to come. Isabella, however, walked through the halls with a newfound confidence. She had become a symbol, not just for herself, but for every student who had ever been marginalized. For months, she had endured the slights, the jabs, the isolation. But now she felt a sense of power, not from her fists, but from the truth that was about to be revealed. Nicole was by her side, as always, quietly documenting the shift in the atmosphere. They knew it wouldn't be long before Lucas and his friends would make their move, but this time, it would be different. This time, they weren't going to stand by and take it. Meanwhile, her father's operation was in full swing. General Reynolds, with his meticulous planning, had already started to make his presence felt. He wasn't just coming for the bullies. He was coming for the entire system that had allowed them to flourish without fear of consequence. At the mayor's office, Thaddeus Reynolds, a man whose influence stretched far and wide, sat with Gregory Beatley and William Collins. The three men, pillars of Rivercrest's elite society, had been plotting for years. They controlled the city's wealth, the local politics, and most crucially, they controlled Eldridge Academy. But their carefully constructed world was beginning to crack. "I hear there's trouble with a scholarship student," William Collins said, swirling his coffee cup. "A girl named Isabella Parker, I believe." Thaddeus Reynolds frowned, checking his watch. "She's a non-issue. A distraction, but I'll handle it. We have bigger things to focus on." Gregory Beatley, his cold, calculating demeanor unwavering, added, "Her father's just some washed-up soldier. A man who's seen better days. He won't cause us trouble." They all laughed, unaware that General Reynolds had already initiated his plan to bring them down. His strategy wasn't about brute force. It was about precision, about using the very system they had built to expose their corruption. In the shadows, the general's team had already gathered damning evidence against them: financial records, telephone logs, and records of misconduct. Back at Eldridge, things were escalating. Lucas and his friends, emboldened by their apparent immunity, decided to confront Isabella once again. It was just another day in the lunchroom, but the tension was undeniable. Lucas pushed his way through the students, a smirk on his face as he made his way toward Isabella. "I hear you've been making some noise," Lucas sneered, grabbing her arm roughly. "You should have learned your place, scholarship girl." Isabella didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unyielding. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the fear she still felt deep inside. Before Lucas could react, Nicole stood up beside Isabella, her phone out, recording everything. The eyes of the lunchroom were on them now, and the bullies knew it. They didn't have the same power they once had. "Think this will go away?" Nicole asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You should be worried. This is being documented. You're not as untouchable as you think." Lucas froze for a moment, realizing that things were no longer in his control. The silent witnesses in the lunchroom murmured among themselves. But it was too late. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The next day, things took an even darker turn. Isabella was called into the principal's office. She sat across from Director Regina Harper, who had clearly been briefed on the situation. Regina, usually a composed woman, looked uneasy. "Isabella, we need to talk about the allegations," Regina said, her voice tight. "This is a very serious matter." Isabella didn't hesitate. "What's serious is the way the school has been turning a blind eye to everything. The bullying, the racism, the corruption. It's all been swept under the rug." Regina's face paled. She was caught between two worlds, the pressure from the school's wealthy donors and the truth that Isabella was now forcing her to confront. The stakes had just been raised. "Let me be clear, Director," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "I won't stop until the truth comes out. You may have protected these kids in the past, but I'm not afraid to expose everything." Regina's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "You're making a big mistake, Isabella. You don't understand the consequences of going after these people." Isabella stood up, her resolve unshakable. "I understand more than you think. But the real question is, do you want to be on the right side of history?" The tension at Eldridge Academy continued to grow. Students who had once silently observed the bullying were now beginning to speak up. The ripple effect of Isabella's courage had begun to spread across the campus. The untouchables, once invincible in their privilege, were now facing an onslaught they hadn't anticipated. Their confidence wavered as the whispers grew louder. Isabella knew that the moment she spoke to Principal Harper, everything would change. The administration would have no choice but to act, or they would be exposed for their complicity in the years of abuse. She wasn't backing down, and she wasn't alone anymore. Nicole's support was unwavering, and with the video evidence they had gathered, the walls around the untouchables were crumbling. Meanwhile, General James Reynolds was executing his plan with precision. The information his team had gathered was damning, revealing a network of corruption that stretched far beyond the school. His operatives had quietly infiltrated the circles that had long protected the privileged families, uncovering financial discrepancies, blackmail, and illegal dealings. This was more than a personal vendetta. It was a war for justice. Back at Eldridge, Lucas and his friends were feeling the heat. They knew that Isabella had gone to the administration, and their arrogance began to crack. They tried to intimidate her one last time, cornering her in the hallway between classes. "Think you've won?" Lucas sneered, stepping into her path. "You're just a scholarship kid. No one cares about your little crusade." But Isabella stood her ground. She had prepared for this moment, knowing they would come after her. Nicole, ever watchful, was discreetly recording from the shadows. This time, there would be no escape for them. "I'm not doing this for me," Isabella said, her voice calm but full of conviction. "I'm doing this for everyone you've hurt. For every student you've silenced. This ends now." The confidence in her voice was enough to make Lucas pause. He could see the shift in the air. No longer was Isabella the scared girl who walked the halls alone. She had become a force, and she wasn't backing down. At the same time, in a high-rise building far from Eldridge, General Reynolds was finalizing the final phase of his operation. The evidence was in place. The people he needed to expose the corruption were already in position, and the plan was ready to go into action. He had done everything by the book, without a single military asset involved. This was about strategy, not force. His first move was to expose the truth to the school board. He had already sent them a dossier detailing the corruption at the highest levels of Eldridge Academy. The next step would be the media, followed by the legal system. He was confident that once the information hit the press, the school would be forced to act. The public would demand justice, and there would be no escaping the fallout. But there was one final piece to the puzzle: the families involved. Gregory Beatley, Thaddeus Reynolds, and William Collins had all benefited from their influence over the school. It was time for their world to come crashing down. Back at Eldridge, the first cracks in the facade began to appear. Director Harper, under increasing pressure, called a meeting with her staff. The room was tense, the silence thick with anticipation. "We've received some troubling information," Harper began, her voice strained. "There's a report of financial misconduct, and it implicates some of our top donors. We need to prepare for an investigation." The teachers exchanged uneasy glances. They had all known, on some level, that the system at Eldridge was flawed, but hearing it out loud was a different matter. Harper's words were a clear indication that the school was beginning to realize the scope of the problem, but it was too late. The walls were coming down, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Isabella knew her father's plan was in motion, but she had no idea just how far-reaching the consequences would be. As the days passed, the whispers turned to rumors, and the rumors turned to full-blown investigations. The school's shady practices were now being scrutinized by the media, and the parents of the untouchables were scrambling to protect their children. The air in Eldridge Academy was thick with uncertainty. Students whispered in the hallways, glancing nervously over their shoulders, while the teachers exchanged tense words in the faculty lounge. No one knew exactly what was going on, but everyone felt it, the calm before the storm. The school's prestigious reputation was at risk, and its walls, built on a foundation of privilege, were starting to crack. Isabella had become the center of attention, but not in the way she had feared. She was no longer the silent victim. She had become a symbol, not just of resistance, but of undeniable truth. The system that had protected the elite students for so long was finally being exposed. And no one, not even the untouchables, could avoid the consequences now. Lucas and his friends, once the kings of Eldridge, were beginning to feel the pressure. The evidence of their misdeeds was out in the open, and even though their families had vast resources, the truth had a way of cutting through power and wealth. They had tried to intimidate Isabella, to break her, but now they were the ones who were afraid. The media had picked up on the story. Whispers of financial corruption, racial discrimination, and a pattern of abuse at Eldridge Academy were spreading like wildfire. Isabella walked through the halls, the familiar faces of the untouchables now looking at her with a mix of disdain and fear. Their laughter no longer echoed through the corridors with the same confidence it once had. The change was subtle but undeniable. Isabella could feel the shift in the energy around her, and it gave her a sense of satisfaction she hadn't expected. Her father's plan was working. The day after the initial media coverage, an unexpected delivery arrived at the school. A package for Isabella. When she opened it, she found a set of photographs that would change everything. They were taken from the personal files of the Beatley family, revealing evidence of financial fraud, bribery, and illegal dealings that had kept the power structure in place for years. It was clear that these photos weren't just a coincidence. Someone had made sure that the truth would come out. And the source was none other than General Reynolds. He had used every contact, every piece of information at his disposal to expose the corruption in a way that would leave no room for denial. The photos were forwarded to the media, and within hours, the entire city of Rivercrest was buzzing with outrage. The people who had long been in power, Gregory Beatley, Thaddeus Reynolds, and William Collins, were now facing public shame. The web of corruption they had woven over the years was unraveling, thread by thread. Isabella knew that this was only the beginning. Her father's reach was far, and the impact of his actions would continue to ripple through Eldridge Academy. But the untouchables weren't going to fall quietly. They had one final card to play. Lucas, who had been trying to lay low after the media coverage, called Isabella out one last time. He confronted her in the parking lot after school, his eyes filled with anger and desperation. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You're just a kid. You think your father can protect you forever? My dad, he's untouchable, will bury you." Isabella didn't flinch. Her father had taught her well, and she wasn't afraid anymore. She stood tall, staring Lucas down. "Your father is already buried," Isabella said, her voice steady and unshaken. "And so are you." Before Lucas could respond, Isabella turned and walked away, her steps confident. The world had shifted. The power had shifted. The untouchables were no longer in control, and the truth had become their greatest enemy. The days that followed were a wind of revelations. The once proud halls of Eldridge Academy, which had long stood as a monument to privilege, were now filled with the tension of 1,000 secrets being exposed. Isabella felt the weight of it all. Her courage had sparked a revolution, but the aftermath was still unfolding. The media storm was relentless. Journalists swarmed the school, demanding answers, and stories of corruption and abuse spread across the headlines. Eldridge Academy, The prestigious institution that had served as a breeding ground for the elite was now at the center of a scandal that threatened to tear it apart. Every day brought new revelations, not just about the Beatleys, Reynolds, and Collins, but about the system itself that had allowed these families to manipulate the rules to their advantage. General Reynolds, ever the strategist, continued to stay in the shadows, letting the storm he had set in motion run its course. His plan had worked flawlessly. The truth, once hidden in the darkness, was now impossible to ignore. The public outcry was deafening, and the school board had no choice but to act. Behind closed doors, the administrators scrambled to contain the damage. Director Harper, who had long protected the school's elite families, now found herself on the defensive. She had been forced to resign, unable to escape the fallout of her decisions. Her once ironclad position was now shattered, and the walls of Eldridge Academy were closing in on her. Isabella, despite everything, found herself at the center of the storm. She had become a symbol of resilience and justice, her name whispered with respect and admiration by students and faculty alike. She had stood up to the system, and the system had cracked. But for Isabella, this wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the truth, and it was about making sure that no other student would ever have to endure what she had. As the pressure on the untouchables mounted, Lucas and his friends were beginning to crumble. The Beatley family was under investigation, and the mayor, Thaddeus Reynolds, found himself in the crosshairs of the media. His political career, once thought untouchable, was now on the brink of collapse. Even William Collins, the once powerful businessman, was implicated in a web of fraud and misconduct that stretched back decades. But the most shocking turn of events came when Isabella received an unexpected call. It was from the school board, who in the face of mounting pressure, had called a special meeting. The board members, some of whom had been complicit in the corruption, were now scrambling to salvage whatever they could. They had one question for Isabella. What did she want? For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to breathe. The moment she had been fighting for had finally arrived. It was no longer about exposing the truth. It was about using that truth to ensure a better future for every student at Eldridge Academy. She walked into the meeting room, her father's advice echoing in her mind. Use their weaknesses against them. Never show your cards too soon. The room was filled with nervous faces, administrators, faculty, and board members, all of whom were fully aware that their world had already begun to collapse. Isabella stood at the front, her posture unwavering, her eyes filled with determination. "I don't want revenge," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I want change. I want a school where every student is treated equally, no matter where they come from or what their last name is. I want a school where the rules apply to everyone, not just the privileged few." She paused, letting her words sink in. The board members shifted uncomfortably, but none of them could argue with the truth. The system had been broken for far too long, and Isabella was the one who had finally broken it open. "I also want to make sure that no one who has abused their power ever has the chance to do so again. We need accountability. Real change. And that starts now." Isabella turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a group of leaders who knew they had just been handed their fate. The school, for the first time in decades, would no longer be under the control of the privileged elite. It was time for a new era, one where justice was more than just a concept. In the days that followed the explosive board meeting, Eldridge Academy began to feel like an entirely different place. The changes were slow but inevitable, like the steady crumbling of an old, decaying structure. Isabella's words had been a catalyst, but now the weight of their meaning was settling in. The school, once a fortress of privilege and power, was beginning to open its doors to the light. The first signs of change were small but significant. New policies were put in place, ensuring that no student would ever be subjected to the kind of abuse Isabella had endured. There would be no more hidden secrets, no more ignoring complaints from students who didn't fit the mold of the perfect Eldridge student. The administration was being overhauled, and for the first time, the voices of marginalized students were being heard. Director Regina Harper, who had once turned a blind eye to the misdeeds of the wealthy elite, had resigned in disgrace. Her departure marked the beginning of a new era for the academy. A new principal, chosen by the school board in the wake of the scandal, promised to lead with integrity and transparency. The reforms had started, and there was no going back. As for Lucas Beatley, Thaddeus Reynolds, and William Collins, their worlds were imploding. The Beatley family, once untouchable, was under investigation for money laundering and bribery. Gregory Beatley, the superintendent, had been arrested, his reputation destroyed. Thaddeus Reynolds, the mayor, was facing a scandal of his own, with the media exposing his ties to illegal real estate dealings. William Collins, the businessman, was under fire for embezzlement and fraud. The city of Rivercrest watched in shock as the families that had once controlled everything began to unravel. The powerful figures who had once been above reproach were now struggling to salvage their names. It was a fall from grace that none of them had expected, and they found themselves powerless in the face of the truth. Isabella, however, was not focused on their downfall. She had achieved what she set out to do. The truth had been exposed, and the system had been broken. But it wasn't enough for her to just watch as the wheels of justice turned. She wanted more. She wanted to make sure that no other student would ever feel the same way she had. At a public assembly a week after the board meeting, Isabella stood before the entire student body of Eldridge Academy. Her heart raced, but her voice was steady as she addressed her peers. "This school is changing," she said, her words cutting through the hushed crowd. But change isn't just something that happens on paper. Change happens when we all commit to doing better. When we all stand up and make sure that no one is ever left behind, no matter who they are or where they come from. She paused, looking around at the students in front of her. "I didn't do this alone. I had help. And together, we can keep pushing for the kind of school that welcomes everyone, the kind of school that isn't afraid to stand up for what's right. It's time to make sure that no one at Eldridge ever feels like they don't belong again." The crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just Isabella's victory. It was the victory of every student who had been overlooked, silenced, or ignored. She had sparked a movement, one that would continue long after she graduated. In the days that followed, the Untouchables were no longer a group that ruled the school. Lucas, once the king of Eldridge, was now a pariah, his former friends turning their backs on him. His father's connections no longer protected him, and the weight of the scandal weighed heavily on him. The new administration took swift action to ensure that the school's culture shifted for good. New anti-bullying programs were implemented, and scholarships were expanded to ensure that students from all backgrounds had a place at Eldridge. The school was no longer a place where power and privilege defined who had a voice. Now, everyone had a seat at the table. As for Isabella, she knew that her journey wasn't over. The battle she had fought at Eldridge Academy had been a chapter in a much larger story. She had learned that justice wasn't something that could be handed to you. It was something you had to fight for, no matter how impossible the odds. And as she walked across the stage at graduation, her father standing proudly in the audience, Isabella knew that she had just begun to make her mark on the world. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Isabella's graduation day was a bittersweet moment, a culmination of everything she had fought for, yet only the beginning of the journey ahead. As she stood at the podium, receiving her diploma, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The shy, quiet girl who had once walked the halls of Eldridge Academy with her head down had been replaced by someone entirely different. She was now a beacon of strength, a reminder that change could be fought for and won, even against the most insurmountable odds. The crowd erupted in applause, but it wasn't just for her academic achievements. It was for what she had done for the school. Her name would be remembered at Eldridge, not for her grades, but for her courage in standing up against a broken system. She had done what no one thought possible. She had taken down the untouchables and exposed the corruption that had been hidden for generations. As Isabella made her way off the stage, she spotted her father in the crowd. General James Reynolds, ever the stoic figure, was standing with a slight smile, his proud eyes following her every move. She walked toward him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You did it," he said quietly, pulling her into a hug. "You changed everything." Isabella smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "We did it. All of us." Her father's smile widened. "You were the one who set everything in motion. You showed them that power isn't about who you know, it's about what you stand for." As they walked through the crowded hall, Isabella noticed Nicole by her side. Nicole had become more than just a friend. She had become a sister, someone who had stood by her through it all. The two shared a quiet look, understanding without words. Their journey was far from over. In the days that followed, the ripple effect of Isabella's actions continued to spread. The media coverage of Eldridge Academy's transformation had reached new heights, sparking conversations about inequality, privilege, and the power of student voices. More schools around the country were beginning to look at Eldridge as a model for change. They saw how a single act of courage could turn the tide, how one person's decision to stand up for what was right could reshape the future. For Isabella, the next chapter was just beginning. She had been accepted to several prestigious universities, but it was no longer about following the path others had set for her. She was determined to carve her own. She knew that the fight for justice didn't end at Eldridge. It was a battle she would continue to fight, no matter where life took her. As she sat down with her father one evening, talking about her future, she realized just how much she had learned in the past year. The lessons of courage, of resilience, of never backing down in the face of injustice. They weren't just things she had read in books. They were things she had lived. "I don't know what's next," Isabella admitted, looking out the window at the city skyline. "But I do know one thing. I won't stop fighting for what's right." Her father nodded, his gaze proud. "That's the spirit. You've already made a difference. Now it's time to take that fire and use it to change the world." Isabella smiled, the weight of her father's words settling deep in her heart. She had already faced the impossible, and she had emerged victorious. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.